Hello and welcome to this course where I shall be providing an overview of the AWS Identity and Access Management Service, commonly referred to as IAM, along with its core features. This is a key security service within AWS and is likely to be one of the first security services you will use and come across, allowing you to manage specific access controls within your environment for your users. My name is Stuart Scott and I'm the AWS Content Director here at Cloud Academy. Feel free to connect with me to ask me any questions using the details shown on screen. Alternatively, you can always get in touch with us here at Cloud Academy by sending an email to support@cloudacademy.com, where one of our cloud experts will reply to your question. The information set out in this course has been designed for those who may be in one of the following roles: AWS administrators, security engineers, security architects, and anyone who is looking to increase their knowledge of the IAM service in preparation for an AWS certification. By the end of this course, you will have a greater understanding of AWS IAM, its features, and how it's used to help you manage and control access to your AWS resources. Although this is a beginner's course, it would be advantageous if you had some basic hands-on experience of AWS and some of its core services, but it's not essential. Feedback on our courses here at Cloud Academy is valuable to both us as trainers and any students looking to take the same course in the future. If you have any feedback, positive or negative, it would be greatly appreciated if you can contact support@cloudacademy.com. Please note, at the time of writing this content, all course information was accurate. AWS implements hundreds of updates every month as a part of its ongoing drive to innovate and enhance its services. As a result, minor discrepancies may appear in the course content over time. But here at Cloud Academy, we strive to keep our content up to date in order to provide the best training available. So if you notice any information that is outdated, please contact support@cloudacademy.com, and this will allow us to update the course during its next release cycle. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this lecture where I shall provide an overview of what the Identity and Access Management Service is and what IAM actually means. Firstly, I want to define what is meant by Identity and Access Management, and I shall break this down into two parts, starting with Identity Management. Identities such as AWS usernames are required to authenticate you to your AWS account, and this authentication process is managed in two stages. The first part of this process is to define who you are, effectively presenting your identity. So for example, your AWS username. This identification is a unique value within IAM for your account. So this means IAM would prevent you from having two identical user accounts with the same name in the same AWS account. The second part of the authentication process is to verify that you are who you say you are, and this is achieved by supplying additional data. And when using your AWS usernames, we can verify this by supplying a password. Now, access management relates to authorization and access control. Authorization determines what an identity can access within your AWS account once it's been authenticated to it. An example of this authorization would be the user's list of permissions to access specific AWS resources. For example, they might have full access to EC2 or read-only to RDS. Access control can be classed as the mechanism of accessing a secured resource. For example, using the following: a username and password, and this covers authentication and verification, multi-factor authentication, and MFA is used as an additional verification step following a valid password, or federated access, which allows users external to AWS to access resources securely without having to supply AWS user credentials from a valid IAM user account. Instead, these credentials are supplied from identity providers. For more information on identity federation, please see our existing course here. So essentially, IAM can be defined by its ability to manage, control, and govern authentication, authorization, and access control mechanisms of identities to your resources within your AWS account. Having an understanding of the different security controls from an authentication and authorization perspective can help you design the correct level of security for your infrastructure. It's critical to understand how IAM works and what can be achieved via the service, but it's even more important to know how to implement its features. Without IAM, there would be no way of maintaining security or control of who or what could access your resources and what they could do with them, both internally and externally. IAM provides the components to maintain this management of access, but it is only as strong as secure as you configure it. The responsibility of implementing secure, robust, and tight security within your AWS account using IAM is yours. You are the owner of the AWS account. You must define how secure your access control procedures must be, how much you want to restrict users from accessing certain resources, how complex a password policy must be, and if users should be using multi-factor authentication. All of this and much more is down to you to architect and implement, and much of it will likely depend on your own security standards and policies within your information security management system. In this lecture, I want to talk about some of the different features and components that AWS IAM uses to centrally manage and control security permissions for any identity requiring access to your AWS account and its resources. From within the AWS Management Console, the IAM service can be found under the Security, Identity and Compliance category, and when accessed, it will take you to the IAM dashboard. The initial dashboard of the IAM console will display the following information. The IAM user's sign-in link. This is a URL that you can send to users who will need to gain access to your AWS Management Console. This sign-in link can be customized by clicking on the Customize button to make it easier to remember and read. And if you have multiple AWS accounts, then this customization would help to distinguish between your accounts. IAM resources. This section provides a summary overview of your IAM resources using a simple count of the number of users, user groups, roles, customer managed policies, and identity providers you have configured within IAM. Best practices. This is populated with a list of IAM security best practices that AWS recommends you implement with links on how to do this. I strongly recommend you try to adopt these best practices at your earliest opportunity. Maintaining tight security is paramount when working within a cloud environment. In addition to the dashboard, you will also see two categories on the left menu, Access Management and Access Reports, each listing a number of components underneath. I want to start by reviewing each of these components under Access Management to give you an insight into what each of these are used for, starting with users. User objects are created to represent an identity. This could be a real person within your organization who requires access to maintain your AWS environment, or it could be an identity that is used by an application to interact with your AWS resources programmatically. Users are simply objects representing an identity which are used in the authentication process to your AWS account. Being unique values, every user has an Amazon resource name, an ARN, which you can be referenced by. An example of a user's ARN could be as shown here. When configuring your users, you can set them up for multi-factor authentication. Configuring MFA allows for an additional level of verification to be applied. The user will have to enter a random 6-digit number from a linked MFA device after their usual password. An MFA should be used for the AWS account owner and any other users who have elevated privileges. User groups. IAM user groups are objects much like user objects. However, they are not used in any authentication process. Instead, they are used to authorize members of the group access to AWS resources. So the IAM user groups contain IAM users, and these groups have IAM policies associated that will either allow or explicitly deny access to AWS resources. These policies are either pre-existing AWS managed policies, customer managed policies that are created by you as the customer, or inline policies which are embedded explicitly to the group itself. Roles. IAM roles allow users, other AWS services and applications to adopt a set of temporary IAM permissions to access AWS resources. Roles essentially operate the same as user objects do, in that it's an identity with associated permissions to allow access to different resources. The difference being, however, is that roles don't define a single person. They are designed to be assumed by an identity or service that needs to temporarily acquire a set of permissions. Additionally, roles don't have passwords associated with their identities. Instead, like I just mentioned, roles are assumed as long as you have the correct permissions to assume it. Policies. Policies used within IAM are written as JSON documents, and these define what can and can't be accessed. These policies can be attached to users, user groups, or roles. When working with policies, you can use managed policies or inline policies. Managed policies are viewed as a library of usable policies and come in two different flavors, which can be applied to multiple users, user groups, or roles. So we have AWS managed policies, and these are a list of predefined policies granted varied access to different AWS services. And we also have customer managed policies, and these are policies created and written by you as the customer. Unlike managed policies, inline policies are not stored in a library. Instead, they have to be written and explicitly embedded within a user, user group, or role. As a result, the same policy can't easily be applied to another identity like managed policies can. Identity providers. If you're looking to provide federated access to your AWS resources, then you must add an identity provider. Federated access allows credentials external to AWS to be used as a means of authentication to your AWS resources. For example, you could establish a trust between your Active Directory Federation server on premises and your AWS account. Or you could establish a trust between your AWS account and your Google credentials. Either way, in these instances, your ADFS server or your Google account could be configured as identity providers, allowing those authenticated by Active Directory or Google to access your resources in your AWS account. This prevents you from having to create individual IAM user accounts. Password policies. Under account settings, you can enforce a password policy, and it's always best practice to do so. The password policy should be used to enforce the minimum security requirements that need to be met for any password standards that your organization might have to adhere to. The password policy applies to all IAM users within your account, and as you can see here, you can be very specific by enabling or disabling and configuring different controls. Security Token Service Endpoints. The STS service is used to allow you to request temporary limited privilege credentials for both IAM users and federated users. The STS endpoints provide a list of regions that are either activated or deactivated for STS. By default, all regions are activated. However, it is recommended you deactivate the regions you do not intend to use. By default, STS uses the global endpoint of sts.amazonaws.com. However, when using regional endpoints, it can help to reduce latency. So that's given a quick overview of the components covered by access management. I now want to look at the features that come under the category of access reports, starting with Access Analyzer. And this is used to generate findings when a policy on a resource within your zone of trust allows access from outside your zone of trust. So this could be from a number of different sources, such as an IAM role allowing cross-account access, or a bucket that allows a different account to upload objects into the bucket. Basically, any resource that allows external access to your resources will be flagged and highlighted to ensure you're aware of the access. And this is a great tool to help you reduce security risks and threats, as you or your team may have unintentionally allowed access to a resource you shouldn't have. Any issues are recorded by Access Analyzer as a finding, allowing you to review the access. Credential Report. The Credential Report is a great tool that allows you to generate and download a CSV file containing a list of all your IAM users and their credentials. This provides a quick and easy way to review your accounts and the last time they were used, in addition to identifying when a user's password was last changed and if they have multi-factor authentication enabled. Organization Activity. If using AWS organizations, it allows you to select an organizational unit, an OU, or account to view its service activity over the previous 365 days. By drilling down into the accounts in this section, you can see which users have had activity, in addition to which AWS services they have accessed over a given time frame. And service control policies. This links in with the previous component of organization activity, and it lists any service control policies that are applicable to the account and the number of identities affected. Service control policies, or SCPs, are different from identity-based policies, which grant permissions to users, user groups, and roles, as SCPs do not actually grant permission themselves. Instead, SCPs are used with AWS organizations to implement and set a boundary of permissions for AWS accounts. So for example, let's say a user within an AWS account had full access to S3, RDS and EC2 via an identity-based policy in IAM. If the service control policy associated with that AWS account denied access to the S3 service, then that user would only be able to access RDS and EC2, despite having full access to S3. The SCP would prevent the service from being used within the AWS account and so have the overriding precedence and determine the maximum level of permissions allowed. This course covered some of the fundamental concepts of AWS IAM. It was designed to give you an insight into the service, providing an explanation of what it is and what it's used for, in addition to the core features that IAM provides to help you secure your AWS environment and its resources. I started by explaining what is actually meant by identity and access management and the difference between authentication, authorization, and access controls. I then focused on the components of IAM which allow you to manage and implement security controls, and these included users, user groups, roles, policies, identity providers, password policies, and security token service endpoints. I then gave a quick review of some of the reporting features that IAM offers, which covered Access Analyzer, Credential Report, Organization Activity, and Service Control Policies. That now brings me to the end of this lecture and to the end of this course, and so you should now have a greater understanding of how IAM is used to securely manage access to your resources. Feedback on our courses here at Cloud Academy is valuable to both us as trainers and any students looking to take the same course in the future. If you have any